Hello and welcome to this episode of Open Social Media Initiative, where we offer high quality social media education every week at noon PST. Um, if you could mute yourself, please, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. My name is Sherry Nuraini. I am your host and also founder and president of Captive Touch, which is the sponsor of these weekly workshops. This week, I am thrilled to host a presentation by Ric Dragon, who is the co-founder and CEO of Dragon Search. He also has extensive experience in process development and digital marketing. He also has written 2 fantastic books, and his most recent book I have chosen personally to use as a textbook for a marketing with social media course that I'll be teaching in January at University of California. So I'm thrilled today that Ric is here to share his knowledge with us. Now, before I give the floor, let me center on myself first. Before I give the floor to Ric, I just wanted to say a few things. Ric has been generous enough to give away a signed copy of his latest book. I'm really excited about that, but we can only give 1 copy, and how you can enter to win the book we will announce at the end of his presentation, so stay tuned. And also, if you would like to share the knowledge that Ric is offering us today with your Twitter followers, please use the hashtag OpenSM in order to do that. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Ric and mute myself.
Thank you, Sherry. Good to be here with you all. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to switch over a little bit to the actual slide deck and use that as the basis for my discussion with you today. Let's see, go. So one of the fundamentals that I start off with in this conversation is that when we talk about social media in general and social media marketing in particular, because that's my bailiwick, we're really in the middle of a revolution, or at the beginning of a revolution, if you will. Just asking, did my screen take over? Are we up there? Okay, thanks, Sherry. And you can debate that to a certain extent. Is it really a revolution, or is it just another medium that's come along and changed things? And I think there's a lot of argument that can be made that the old systems of business communication truly have been turned upside down. We've gone through hundreds of years of marketing where it's been businesses or organizations broadcasting messages to many, and we have a system now in which there's one-on-one conversations. There's a much greater need for a very distinct brand voice, and there's a lot of different ways that we approach this thing that truly mean that it's a revolution in business marketing or business communication. I'm going to discuss today 3 premises, very simple premises. One is that social media falls into patterns. Now, social media is very overwhelming. It's constantly changing. When I started digital marketing a little over 15 years ago, I could somewhat master all of the elements that I needed to master and then train others in the shop. And today with social media, that's not true. One person can't possibly master all elements of it. It really requires teams of people to take different elements and work together. But part of getting over that overwhelmingness of social is to understand it in terms of patterns, very much the way that buildings and communities also fall into patterns of architecture or space. The second premise is that not all social media marketing endeavors are the same. A lot of times people say, look, I'm doing social media marketing. Well, what does that mean? There's different ways of using social media marketing. And in fact, we've identified at least 5 that we constantly reference. So I'm going to be speaking about those major different ways. The third premise is that we can apply process to social media marketing. For some people, the idea of bringing process to bear on social media makes a lot of sense. They're like, sure, definitely we need to do that. We know we need to do that. And there's a lot of other people who say process you're going to kill the thing with process. This is us being heart to heart and speaking with one another, and this process business is just going to kill it. And my premise is that we not only can bring process, but in fact that we should. Process doesn't have to be a dirty word. Each of us, those of us who wear pants, most certainly typically put our underwear on first. This is following a process. We make coffee a certain way. Process doesn't have to be the death of an activity or a creative activity. It can actually lend itself to creativity. So when we talk about patterns in social media, we've designed something called the social media pyramid. And it's a mind map, if you will. It's a visual aid, and it's not all comprehensive. We've actually found other elements of social media that aren't in this. One example, for instance, is any particular social media platform business friendly or not? Can you exist on this platform as a brand or a business entity as opposed to just an individual? If you remember when Google Plus first came on board, you could only exist there as an individual, and you weren't even allowed to exist as a person, and then they allowed the brand to come in. But these 9 elements here we find to be pretty pervasive through various social platforms to different degrees. And this pyramid is just a thinking aid to apply to any given social platform. So for instance, in the very top, we've got the element of identity. On most social platforms, you pimp out your profile. That's your identity, how you can identify yourself. You can have relationships. And old social media platforms, you didn't necessarily create relationships. You simply existed in the platform together. And yet in other platforms, you actually see where relationships can be enhanced to some degree, more so than others. You can have conversations, groups, presence, curation, reputation, and gaming, and finally gifting. And I'll talk a little bit about those as they apply, let's say, to Facebook. Now we know the color coding here, the grayscale, is used to indicate strength of. So if you think of it in terms of a scale of 1 to 5, 5 is black, 1 would be totally white. And we can see that Facebook is very strong in almost all of these elements of social media, except presence. It's a little weaker. Is somebody online right now in Facebook? And they're starting to show that it's stronger. And then the element of reputation is somewhat weaker in Facebook. A good example of where it might be strong is if any of you belong to the social platform on SEO Moz, when a member of the community contributes more to the community, they gain points, and thus they garner reputation. And if we were modeling SEO Moz's social site, that would probably be a 5. Twitter, on the other hand, is weaker in most things except conversations and the concept of gifting. Now, when I use the word gifting, I'm not simply meaning it in terms of, geez, I'm giving you a birthday present, but even those activities such as retweeting someone or following somebody can be seen as being a gift. And a good evidence of that is the fact that a lot of time when I retweet someone, they come back and they say thank you. Or if I follow someone, they may come back and thank me. We call these micro gifts. They're very small gifts. And when you delve into the whole science of influence, you start to see that reciprocity and the rule of what's been called the rule of reciprocity is a very powerful motivator. And to a certain extent, being aware of that and using it in social platforms can be very powerful. Finally, Google Plus, we can see, is fairly strong. Again, in presence, you can't see when someone's present. And reputation is very weak. It's very much follows the same patterns as Facebook here. And you can take the same pyramid and apply it to Pinterest or 4chan or any other platform. And as a tool, it's simply a thinking tool and can actually be used if you're doing competitive analysis, for instance. You can use this as a guide for identifying how one company may be using these elements better than other elements in social. The other element, we talk about engagement. Now, the whole world of engagement is interesting. There's books about engagement. What exactly is engagement? And at the very top level, we can have monologue. Unfortunately, I'm having a monologue right now. But if you say things in this little panel on the side, I can actually see it, and we could potentially have more of a dialogue, as we will later. dialogue, of course, is back and forth. The writer and thinker Gary Shank came up with this notion way before the proliferation of social media of the multi-log. And the multi-log is actually what we see manifest itself in Twitter chats, where you have a lot of different voices happening at the same time, maintaining the distinction of voice, side conversations occurring, but still within all of the big noise. It's a very interesting phenomenon that we're seeing playing out in social. We have transactional, and then finally that gifting. So again, these are just patterns, so that when you look at behaviors that are occurring on social, do they fall into these patterns or even other patterns that I'm not necessarily identifying here? One of the very exciting things for me about the whole study of social media is the fact that we're able to pull in psychology, we're able to pull in sociology, ethnography, the history of marketing. There's so many various sciences and human endeavors that come into play. One of the very strong behaviors that have been identified in social is the concept of social grooming. Robin Dunbar, this wonderful British psychologist who gave us the Dunbar number. Now, the Dunbar number suggests that people are capable of forming social groups, stable social groups of about 140 people, 150 people. After that, these groups become unstable. And a lot of debate about that and a lot of misunderstanding of what the Dunbar number really means, because he's talking about that stability. It means that if the bunch of us in this hangout right now not only knew one another, but knew one another's relationship to each other, right? So I know that Stephen Caggiano and Nani know one another, and perhaps they're friends. Now, to really understand a very large group of people and all their interrelationships requires a lot of brain power. Well, Dunbar, the same guy who came up with that, came up with the notion that of chatter or chit-chat being an extension of what all mammals do, which is allogrooming or social grooming, picking at one another's nits or licking their young or combing each other's hair. And that when animals do this with one another, it actually induces dopamine, this neurochemical that makes you feel good. It has a very strong power. Dunbar's hypothesis that was chatter was a human's extension of that social grooming brought into our species, if you will. Another fun notion that I've seen play a role is the idea of commensality. Commensality is that way we behave with one another when we're eating and drinking together. There's nothing like, we may have a fabulous conversation, but it can really become richer and deeper when we sit down and knock beer steins and break bread with one another. You actually see a lot of commensality behavior in social media. Instantly, you'll see where people say, hey, would you like a cocktail or a slice of pie? And people often start these conversations off with this talk of commensality. And I'd suggest that brands doing marketing in this space need to understand this behavior isn't simply silly, doesn't make sense behavior. It actually is very strong bonding behavior that often precedes deeper conversations. So now we jump into the social marketology framework. Social marketology is a framework. It is not a specific process. It's a framework in which you can apply a lot of processes, smaller processes. We start off with this concept of desired outcomes. We go into a middle cycle of us, them, communities, and influencers. And what I mean by that, when I talk about us, I talk about a process wherein we more clearly define the brand personality. Them is where we more clearly define our audience segmentation with much more granularity than marketers did when segmentation was very powerful in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then finally, we take that information and we're able to do community research, really find out where our audiences are playing, if you will, in the social space. And then who are the influencers within those spaces? So that's a very strong core piece of research that we do that finally leads into the action plan. Then we execute the action plan and we're able to measure our results and then refresh and reinvent. The phrase desired outcomes is an onerous phrase, I know. But the problem is goals and objectives doesn't really cover the full landscape of what we're trying to do. And I talk about it in terms of a landscape. Now, for us here at Dragon Search is a very critical first part of any job where we really suss out with stakeholders what their desired outcomes are. And we'll start with things like purpose, vision, those very fuzzy aspects of what an organization or brand is setting out to do. And that's going from left to right here. We get a little bit less fuzzy when we start talking about goals, and then finally the objectives that lead up to goals. And of course, with all of these, we try to see them from various perspectives. And then we get into very specific metrics. Let's see, I think I have I do, good. So this is an example of a matrix that we'll use in discussing with clients. And we'll start off with real core business metrics. So we may speak of revenue or customer lifetime value, earnings per employee. It's going to be different with different businesses. For instance, we're doing some work for one of the largest real estate builders in Manhattan. And of course, what they're concerned with is their vacancy time. How many days per year is any one unit vacant? And they want to see that number decrease, of course. So we want to understand these metrics. We'll then go into website metrics. We'll go into e-commerce and social media metrics. We really want to suss out all the very particular metrics, but we also try to get those big picture sense of purpose and vision that the organization may have. Very, very critical piece of work. When I interviewed well over a dozen major marketers globally, almost every single one of them concurred and even suggested before being asked that the biggest piece missing in social media marketing was a sense of desired outcomes or metrics. I'm seeing I'm perhaps not being quite loud enough. Is that maybe a little better? So the next piece of work that we go into is what we call brand voice or brand personality. And you know, it's interesting, we did a study very early on a few years back where we took these boards with photographs of people on them. And we had a soccer mom, we had a hip young Asian guy, we had various real types of people, if you will. And we took them out on these boards and we went out to, let's say it was a mall, and we asked people, well, if Starbucks was to wake up one morning as a person and get out of bed, have breakfast, walk across town and knock on your door, you open your door, who are you meeting? And we asked them, and they would look at the board and people would choose the person that they thought most resembled Starbucks. And we did this with many brands. The interesting thing was that a preponderance of people chose a certain image for a certain brand. And what it proved was people do project a sense of persona onto a brand. Interestingly, by the way, Starbucks was a soccer mom. And that was totally unexpected to me or the people doing the research. And Google was a hip young Asian guy, which is interesting because neither of the founders of Google are either hip nor Asian. And British Petroleum was a grumpy old middle-aged guy, which was probably pretty easy to see from the other side of the room. So one of the things we like to use is Jennifer Acker's 5 brand personality traits. It's a great guide. The concept of 5 brand personality traits is used in psychology, and she brought it to the use of brands. And we find that sometimes we're able to help pin down what a brand is or who a brand is, and using this. So this is just some of them. We don't have to go over them in particular. It's a lot of detail, and it's in the book, and they're available online. You can Google her 5 brand personality traits. It's a great tool, though. We've actually done what's called dot voting. So if we have a whole marketing team or a team of executives, we can assign them 10 red dots each, and place them where you think your brand should be. Another helpful thing is to think in terms of these more larger scale things. Do we want our voice to be a maven or from a passion point of view? You can have a community love voice. You can have a promotional voice is my least favorite and don't recommend it. And there's others. Another trick is also to think in terms of celebrities or personalities that people know. Sometimes it just helps to say, our brand is Tom Hanks and Forrest Gump. That's who our brand is, and that's where we want to speak from. And sometimes that as a tool can be very helpful for a marketing team or community managers speaking on your behalf. Indiana Jones, in fact, is sort of what we identify Dragon Search as being. You know, he's able to speak to a college class with a little bow tie, and yet he's able to then don his leather hat and bullwhip and go chase Nazis. So the third exercise that we get into, one of my favorites, is called microsegmentation. Now, microsegmentation doesn't replace traditional marketing segmentation. You still want to do that type of work, but with microsegmentation, often takes the form of brainstorming. And we usually start off with a central question. Who should care about what we're doing here? Who should care about this brand? And in this particular example, where we're doing some work for a company that made crystal figurines of animals. So we can certainly start off with a central premise of people who love animals. And then we sort of start breaking it off into the different types. You know, there's farm animals and African wildlife. You know, it's funny, in the whole world of African wildlife, there's people who are fanatics for giraffes and elephants, domestic animals, which of course there's fish, birds, cats, and dogs. And in dogs, there's obedience and rescue and working and breeds, the particular breeds, and then all the different types of groups. And then we get down to terriers, and there's Airedales, people who love Airedales. And in fact, when we look at people who love Airedales, you can start to find little small groups of people like the Airedale Terrier Club of Illinois. We did this exercise for the Grammy Cares Foundation, and one of the things we got into was people who teach music. And when we got down to the level of the Berklee School of Music, we found that there was a group of people there who loved world music. And in that group was a subgroup that went Zydeco dancing every Thursday night. That's a microsegment. Now, the beauty of microsegments is, as part of our marketing process, we build out a big list of all these imaginable microsegments. And then we look at it and we say, well, this is where we're apt to have low-hanging fruit. Let's go after these guys or these guys or these guys. And then iterate through these microsegments and go out and do the research around where they are in communities so that we can engage with them on behalf of the brand. And in some places, we won't get any traction. And in another place, we'll get a lot of traction. And so we may put more emphasis there. But this microsegmentation document ends up becoming a very core element of our work because it guides us where we can go and become involved with communities. So then we do community research. Now, community research is typically, it's web-based, it's a lot Google-based. There's a lot of tools out there you can use, things like BrandWatch and Cred and Clout and other tools. I still find Google to be pretty much one of the hottest tools yet. Somebody's mic is on.
I'll call you.
Nani, turn your mic. There you go. Thank you. Use keyword research that ties into our SEO work. We know whether communities exist or we have to create them. We look at how we can potentially participate, and on and on. So after, this is a neat little concept that came out a couple of years ago by some sociologists, the idea of wispy communities. And it's really quite useful to marketers. A wispy community is a very temporary community. So for instance, you've got people who love the Great Lebowski, and they get together once a year, and for a week they have a Great Lebowski sort of big event, and they dress up and they recite the roles, and they have a great time. And when they go back to their offices, they hang up pictures from that event. And community building, of course, we often think social media in terms of community building. Community as a concept by itself has shifted over time. We used to think of community as the people who lived in the same little village or crossroads, but once with the proliferation of travel and communications, the community can form anywhere. We right now are forming a community, and none of us even live close to one another right now. A community can form at the end of a grocery store line. We can all be upset that it's an express line, but somebody has 21 items instead of 20, and can you believe it? And we can share this anger and form a very quick, transitory community. But what we do in the whole world of community building is a type of social media project, community management, the nurturing of community around our passion space or our brand is a very strong type of project. Influencer project, one of my favorite, very powerful in the world of B2B and services, where fundamentally what we're doing is we're identifying very influential people in our space, and we're watching them, we're monitoring, we're listening to them. In essence, we're professional stalkers. The difference between a professional stalker, Nani's smiling because that's part of her job, the difference between a professional stalker and an amateur stalker is we do it in such a way that a person should never feel like they're being stalked. If you like every single thing that Chris Brogan says, he's going to think that you're a little weird perhaps and won't want anything to do with you. But if you really want to listen to him and start forming relationships with him, it can be done well over time. And the final type of social media project is what I call the big splash social media project. And this is the type of project that tends to get press. This is the one we hear about, people talk about them. The best example, of course, is the Old Spice campaign. Pepsi's Refresh campaign is a good example of a big splash campaign. One of my favorites is the Quicksilver, the surfing clothing, the skateboarding clothing, and when they did the video of the kids throwing a stick of dynamite into a city pond, and another kid getting up on a surfboard and surfing the wave that the dynamite makes. They took this video and it went viral. It was really fabulous for getting quick brand recognition and some nice warm fuzzy feelings around the brand. It wasn't intended to build community. It was not intended to develop relationships with influencers, but it did make that big splash, and it is a certain type of project. And we've broken down these projects and we've identified what makes them work as opposed to others. And there are very strong elements to these things. When we actually get into the work itself, we find that the fundamental things that we can do fall into four major elements. Of course, we do the identity work. We're building out our profiles. We're managing our brand. The next thing we do, and this is ubiquitous across all social media, is the concept of forming connections. I follow you, you follow me, I fan you, I friend you, you friend me. We're somehow shaking hands and agreeing to have a relationship in some sense or another. They may be symmetrical, we may be friends with one another, or you might simply be a follower of me, and that's an asymmetrical relationship. But in some form or another, we have to make those connections. We get into the world of creating content, and then finally we actually engage. And as a cycle, now we can sort of bypass the identity work. We've done that. We may revisit it every so often, but we get back into the world of making more connections, creating content, and engaging with people. And we can find that our activities fundamentally fall into these buckets. Another core concept that I think is really, really important to social media marketing is the idea of having passion and purpose behind the brand. Mark Pritchard from P&G has spoken that P&G brands need to have a purpose. And these are some examples. Coca-Cola's work with happiness. Nike's overcoming physical limits. When you study Nike's posts in social media, you very rarely see them talking about, hey, look at our new shoes. You see them talking about, hey, congratulations, Coach Jones, on your 200th win. You're looking great in that yellow jersey. So they're talking from an entirely different place. Dove, women feeling good about themselves. These are different places where brands can behave in social media that are a lot more powerful than if they're being promotional, talking about their own stuff. Nobody wants to be friends with a brand talking about their own stuff, being self-promotional. Very rarely. You have to be one of those extreme hyper love brands like Harley for someone to really want to listen to your stuff about your brands, about your products. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about social media value. This is a very contentious area. Those of us in social media who do it for a living, and I'm looking at my screen and I see many of you there that I know work in social media, we all know it's valuable. And yet sometimes we go into a C-suite office or boardroom or conference room. We're talking to a CEO or CMO or COO, and they're like, so why should we invest in social media? What's the ROI? And several people have gone back and written books about ROI of social media. We can demonstrate it to a certain extent. You have to ask, well, is it good social media or crappy social media, of course. But we get into a lot of these discussions, and I think one of the fundamental problems is that to see social media as a driver of immediate transactions is frequently faulty. I rarely see, it does happen sometimes, but it rarely does. On the other hand, where I really see a lot of value being created is in larger brand equity issues, the enhancement of existing market, the impact on organic search, certainly risk mitigation. We know that if that building owner in New York that had the crane that was dangling all week during the hurricane, they didn't even answer people on their page. Had they had a robust social media presence, they could have engaged with people and done a lot for the brand. We see that the cost of acquiring customers or maintaining customers can frequently go down. And we can ask executives, if we could have a 0.5% on increase in awareness, what would the impact on that be on your business? We can ask these questions around all of these things and ask those executives what assumptions they can live with and actually create a model that demonstrates a great deal of value in social. So that is my final screen. Lots of other things I could talk about, but I thought I would try to leave some room open for discussion.
That was one of the best PowerPoint slides I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
It's actually amazing because you communicated so much in so little slides, and I'm still trying to master that myself.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, it was kind of there was so much shared that it was hard to type, which is fine. People can read the book. Anybody here ask any questions? You can unmute yourself now. Nobody?
I actually posted a question in the comments. Why
don't you say it?
Yes, here we go. So Rick, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, and pardon the background noise. Why do you think that it is that businesses expect so much from social media right now, yet they're still dumping tons of money, obscene amount of money into traditional mass marketing? They don't ask the questions with that, but when it comes to social media.
It is interesting because, the studies very clearly show that consumers are spending a proportionately higher amount of time in social media, and yet the marketers are actually a little bit slower to shift dollars over to it. But, you have to try to understand things through a CEO's point of view. Typically, and I cannot believe how often it is, the C-suite themselves are not social. They're not on Facebook, they're not on Twitter, they have nothing but disdain for it. I frequently see that. So imagine, they're sitting there doing their things, and a marketer comes in and says, hey, we've got to do this Twitter thing. We've got to do this Facebook, this LinkedIn thing. And they're like, okay, sure, prove it to me. Because that's the way the C-suite thinks, as they should. They're business people. They are shepherding, their dollars and maximizing. Listen, at different levels of companies, you're on Main Street, America. For a small company to spend $10,000 a year on marketing can be a lot. And when you get up the ladder and you're starting to talk to larger brands or sub-brands to larger organizations, before you get to the mega level of Coke and Pepsi,
If you're typing, please mute yourself.
Before you get to that level, you might see marketing budgets, $500K, $1 million. And so let's say a budget's $1 million. And you're saying, we want to take 20% of that budget and put it into social. It's a lot of money. they're going to really want to know, am I truly going to get more from that, spending that over there, as opposed to buying Google ads? So it's our job to understand the modeling well enough to be able to present that, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, personally, I think there's a huge need for education. I mean, we might think that there is enough educational workshops or whatever, but I think there is a need for offering education to everybody. I think for us to be able to work with the C-suite or all just with small business owners, the foundation should be, everybody should, that's the way I feel. We should all get to the same level in terms of understanding what it takes.
It's a key part of our job.
Yeah.
I had one of our clients is a franchise, and as a result, let's say they've got 20 franchisees that we work with, and this past week we had conversations with every single franchisee, a lot of conversations, and probably 9 out of 10 got it. And they're like, oh, wonderful. There'd be the one person who's just like, I'm still not getting it. And it's challenging. And by the way, that one person out of 10 was a really successful business person who had been a CEO at a major, Forbes 500 company. So that's a great challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, we have a question here. It says, Noni says, what do you think about Facebook thinking people, well, you can read it.
So what do you think about Facebook thinking people would want to turn timeline into brand voices only through settings? So that's basically Facebook's sort of little tip of the hand, if you will. By the way, Stephen, would you mute? I think that we are getting some buzz from you, I think. If you would, please. Thank you. Appreciate it. Facebook recently did this whole thing where your brands aren't showing up on Facebook timeline as often. The pages aren't, I should say. And they're pushing people gently into doing purchases, buying ads. And their revenue is just increasing wildly. It's a very successful tactic. So brands are embracing it. We're happy to spend money. That's fabulous. Let's do it. But on the other hand, there's a lot of backlash, and every time Facebook makes a major change, there's a big backlash, and there's frequently like a little, well, we'll give you this. So they've come forward with the brand stream, if you will. But honestly, I don't think it's going to have wonderful legs. Listen, marketing people and brands have done it to themselves. We've jumped into people's personal playlands and wanted to market to them. And so, to a great extent, if you were in charge of Facebook and wanted to make the greatest possible experience for your users, you might make it a little bit more challenging for brands to be present. You might do that, and that's what they've done. And it's going to be more challenging. So our challenge, I'm convinced, is to create more wonderful content all across the board, whether it's SEO, whether it's through blogs, Twitter, everywhere. We have to make meaningful, rich content that people want to engage in. By the way, if you have not seen Jonathan Mildenhall's presentation on YouTube called Liquid and Linked, that's on the Coca-Cola company. Jonathan Mildenhall is the VP of Creative at Coca-Cola. He presents a story, it's through one of those RSA animations, telling the story about how Coca-Cola is out to double its revenue by 2020. Now, I paused there so that everybody could gasp, because the idea of a company the size of Coca-Cola doubling its revenue in the next 8 years is phenomenal. It's like a small country doubling its GNP. Their fundamental way of doing this, accomplishing this, is through storytelling. Storytelling through all these various media, particularly using social media. They're talking about creating great, wonderful content that people are going to desire and want to pull at. So we're transitioning. We're transitioning from the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s, where marketers were like, hey, we're sending messages into your head, and look at this ice cube has a naked woman and it's going to make you want to buy my whiskey. You know, we've been up to a lot of tricks. It's completely changed. This is where the revolution part comes in. That approach to marketing will not work in the future marketing. So that was a long roundabout way, Nai, to answer your question.
Well, Rick, that, you know, coming up with really amazing storytelling and coming up with the creative for that could be very expensive, and it could be a challenge for small business owners. Do you think small business owners with limited resources are at a disadvantage in that respect?
No, small business owners actually have the opportunity to really play out the David and Goliath story. It's the mid-sized businesses that are totally screwed. Okay, on the top end of the scale, you've got P&G, you've got Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They've got the resources. They're going to get movies, you know, makers. They're going to actually make movies. They're going to author content. They're going to do all sorts of great stuff. And as this concept, this approach to marketing trickles down little by little, you know, middle business world will start to get it. But it's going to be so difficult because they're already overwhelmed running their businesses. The small businesses, on the other hand, can still be agile. And particularly, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I've had over 5 different businesses in the past 15 years, often concurrently. And every entrepreneur I know works their asses off. We used to joke that as an entrepreneur, you only have to work half the day, and you get to choose which half the day you work, because you never put anything less than a 12-hour day in. Mm-hmm. So if a deal of that time is spent creating content around that entrepreneur's passion points. What are they passionate about? What makes their business unique? They've got the opportunity to do something that the middle guys can't, and so they're going to be able to poach in on that business. It's a beautiful opportunity.
You mean at the very early stages?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, at the early, but listen, a lot of different people call small business different things. My buddy Frank Fallatin on the other side of town has a micro processor equipment company. He's got 200 employees. He calls himself a small business. Right? The lady with across the shop, or the people who've got 5 employees, they're a micro business. But to them, Frank Fallatin's a huge business. It's all different scales depending on which environment you're in. But you know, someone who's agile enough where they can pull the resources together to really address these content areas and fill a gap around their passion points, they have the opportunity. When an organization has gone on the scale of business where they're more in the grind mode and they're maximizing all of their human resources and their equipment and their resources, they don't have the room to stop and get creative and agile. They suffer. But the ones that are still climbing do.
I see. Because it's interesting. I got an email through LinkedIn from somebody who wrote to me very frustrated, saying that we're a 4-person company and we don't have time to create content. We want to find out somehow to provide value. She said, we know we have to have a social media presence, but we don't have time to churn out content that the CEOs and high-level executives that are our customers don't have the time to read. So she was asking me for a particular tool I can help her to automate that, but I almost answered her, what, does everybody have to be on social media? Do you have to do it?
Yes, yes you do. And yes you do, because if you don't, your competitors will, and your competitors will form one-on-one relationships with your customers. And how will you move your competitors out of that relationship when you finally wake up? You're screwed. No, you have to get involved with this meeting. I have yet to find an industry where it did not apply. I've yet to find one.
So the answer to her would be just to suck it up and do it. You know, you have to do it.
Content creation. Start with what you're passionate about. Every single business owner. And you can't stop it. Oh, I'm here to make money. When we start businesses, when I started my business, I remember I started, it was a web production and application development place, and I went down to the Small Business Administration, and Rob Lunsky was there, and he said, you know, basically, why are you in business? And of course, your first answer is, well, I'm here to make money. But that's a bullshit answer. A, because you could be doing a lot of things to make money, and B, your customers don't care if you make money or not.
Mm-hmm.
They care if you provide something that no one else does.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's got to be a passion point behind any business. And when a business owner, entrepreneur can tap into that, the creation of content doesn't have to be sitting down and writing a white paper, which is onerous. I can pull out my iPhone and on the way to work say, isn't that a beautiful building on the corner there? Take a photograph of it. I can share it. If I'm a local business, then I'm starting to talk about a love of my community and a passion for my community that can be shared with others and really create a lot of wonderful engagement around that.
Mm-hmm.
That did not take a lot of time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the I don't have time to do it excuse is so utterly lame. You don't have time to be in business then.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. I was going to answer her. I asked her to give me a call. She didn't. But I was going to tell her, but at least use it for monitoring. Even if you don't have time to create content right now, you can at least use it to monitor what others are saying, who
Yes.
your customers are talking to.
I actually often say that there's three fundamental brand management things that all businesses need to do, whether they're going to engage in social media or not. And one of them is monitoring, of course. The second is having policy.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen organizations that did not have policy in place, and Joe down the hall in sales decided to create a Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
Minus a policy, they were just screwed.
Yeah.
And thirdly, you want to claim your real estate. So you want to create your accounts and have your namespace, or a disgruntled customer or competitor might do so instead.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And we have some questions here. Miles wants to know, do you find more willingness to step into social from US-only companies or worldwide companies?
I do see more U.S. activity by far. In different parts of the world, there's, for instance, in Asia is totally perplexed. When we're talking about the U.S. approaches, or I say U.S.-Canadian really, because North American, a lot going on. When we get into Europe, they're doing wonderful things, but they seem a little bit behind. I haven't studied the European companies quite as in depth as I could, but so far what I'm seeing is a little bit of modest bewilderment. But I wouldn't characterize that Europe is far behind. They're certainly ahead on mobile.
They are ahead on mobile?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the U.S. is woefully behind in mobile. And part of that is this interesting phenomenon that happens with any technology. Early adopters of technology tend to build out infrastructure. And as a result, they're more reluctant to change when that technology has progressed. So when you look at a country that has developed a railroad early on, they've got, 50 years later, they've got this old beat-up railroad. Meanwhile, the country that has only recently built a railroad has a slick, modern railroad. We see that with European and Japan having a much better railroad infrastructure in the U.S. We developed phones and phone lines all across our country early on, beautifully. So when cell technology came along, we were very late to adapt that. Whereas in Israel, Japan, a lot of countries throughout the world, Africa is extremely well connected via mobile, and so they're a lot further advanced. U.S. is following closely. We're entering the mobile revolution. It's going to change once again, the face of digital.
Yeah, more stuff for us to learn. Well, anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Rick. Rick, one of the companies I work for fits into that mid-size business category that you talked about, where you don't have the resources of the big guys, and you're not quite as nimble as the small guys. One of the things that we've found is that finding individuals within the company to assist us with generating content can be pretty tricky. Identifying the right people, the right knowledgeable people. who have the, maybe the writing skills or the personality to be good sources of content for the company. Those people can be tough to identify. Do you have any, tips or advice that maybe you can give us that would help us in identifying who in the company or who in a company would be good or well suited to providing content for this type of purpose?
I think around this in terms of publishing the blog. I mean, blog as the center, the linchpin, right? I mean, ultimately, later we may bring Twitter and Facebook and other things into it, but if we can form the blog as the central publishing house, if you will, and we get the organization to think of terms of their blog is like them having their own Time magazine, right, or their own New Yorker magazine that they're going to put out. And that frequently what we'll do is we'll look at an organization departmentally and as it relates to their customers, and we may ask each department to, who's going to be your passion person, who's going to represent you. So we might be looking at 5 to 6 people, and this is, let's say, an 80-person organization. That's all. I don't want more than 5 or 6 right now because this is my internal brand ambassador team that I'm building. Think of it in those terms. So the blog editorial aspect is best if you control that. If you can manage that editorial, then by creating your framework, your category framework for your blog, which is like in a magazine, I'm going to have different sections, right? The New Yorker magazine always has these sections. Well, I've got this section, on widgets, and Mary over here is going to be my writer on widgets. Now, what you might do in the initial 6-month phase is block out the content. So, gee, we want a regular flow of content in these different categories. This month it's widgets, or in 2 weeks it's going to be blue widgets, and over here it's pens. So Mary, in 4 weeks we're expecting a piece of content from you. Now, problem is Mary may not be a writer. She may know her stuff, so let's plan on interviewing her. And maybe if we're able to do an interview, we can do it sometimes through freeconferencecall.com, get the free MP3. We have the basis of a podcast, perhaps. We can send it to a transcription service that for, forget the price, but it's pretty low, 17 cents a word or whatever. Pretty low cost to do that. So it might, for a 400-word blog, you might be spending $30 to get it transcribed. Pretty low cost. So now I've got a podcast. I've got the transcription. I'm going to edit the piece. Now I can post that. And if I do that every 2 weeks, I've got the real nucleus of content that I can start then engaging in social. Then it's a matter of coaching. So then Mary, would you like to write something? Would you like to do something? But look, there's this very interesting audience of people that you could engage with over here in this LinkedIn group. Would you like to try that? So at that point, I might be doing a seminar in the organization to talk about their opportunities for engaging in social. Again, hopefully I've done that work around brand voice so that I can coach them around that. I've done the work around community so I can share those with them. Then it all flows, and it's much easier to do that.
Fantastic.
Cool.
So, Rick, what is your suggestion for a company who wants to adopt or become a social business? Do they hire a czar of social media, or where do they start?
Well, it is very, very challenging. I think frequently when you're doing large change initiatives in organizations, it's helpful to get outside resources to do that. Because if you hire a czar on day one, let's just say you're a small manufacturing company. Well, you're hiring, what are your criteria for hiring that person? Who's going to manage that person? A lot of small companies hire social media community managers, and yet they're not equipped to manage that person, and they don't know how to direct their activities. So at this stage, we're talking about big change. An organization is going through change. An external agency is really great anytime you have big change in an organization. Ideally, in the dream world, an organization is going to be a social company. They're going to have people throughout the organization doing social. It's all beautiful, and we're dancing and singing because this is happening. But even then, anytime they want to do something that's a major creative piece, it's also very useful to bring in the outside agency because, again, that represents a major change in the process of how things are happening.
Oh, I see. Okay. But do you think, so as companies start becoming a social media, so let's say they have an agency and then they go towards creating their own social media efforts in the company. Do you think in the long run there is any role for a social media agency or a consultant, or is that
certainly.
Okay.
I think so. Once a company does bring in, once they do bring social in-house and they're running, that's what I mean when they do what we call the big splash campaign, for instance. It's very difficult for an internal marketing team or an internal community management team to do a big splash campaign. We're busy doing community management. We're publishing that blog. We're busy. And you want me to do some big initiative that's going to help us break into a whole new market? That's where the agency really comes in handy, because they're bringing in the fresh, clear ideas and are able to nimbly sort of execute those things. Okay.
Thank you very much for your insight. If nobody has any more questions, I'm going to bring it to a close, and I'm going to announce how we're going to give away this wonderful signed book. If you could +1 and share this video, we will choose randomly a person from those who have shared and +1, and then I will put them in contact with Ric's office, and you can have your signed book. And if you are looking at this video, if you're watching it on my YouTube channel or on, I'm going to vlog this on my blog, please don't forget to click the like button. So with that, thank you very much, Ric, for giving us your time, and I'm thrilled to work with you towards development a curriculum for my course.
Super. Thanks so much, Jerry. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Good.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.